Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the untold history of Oo's forgotten kingdoms, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. If you look at most maps of Oo, your eyes are naturally drawn to the big, bright territories, the sprawling Candy Kingdom, the icy lands of the Ice Kingdom, the blazing territories of the Fire Kingdom. But down in the warmer reaches, tucked between cracked earth and sun-bleached stone, there's a place almost no one talks about. The Desert Kingdom. A realm that seems to exist in whispers, half-forgotten murals, and fleeting shots in the background of grander adventures. At first glance, it might seem barren. Endless dunes shifting under the wind, sunlight pressing down until even the rocks seem to sigh in the heat. But hidden under that golden expanse are layers of history, like chapters buried under centuries of sand. Travelers who have crossed those deserts speak of glimpsing ancient stone gates half buried, their carvings worn smooth, yet still carrying the faint outlines of strange symbols. Symbols that don't match any known language in Oo today. No one knows for sure when the Desert Kingdom rose to power or even how large it once was. Some say it might have stretched far beyond what the eye can see now, its cities linked by shimmering roads of glass-like stone, a kind of enchanted obsidian that absorbed the heat by day and released it slowly at night. Imagine walking those roads under a cool desert moon, the air filled with the scent of blooming night flowers and the soft hum of magic woven to the very ground. But what happened to those cities? Why do we now see nothing but scattered ruins and the occasional lonely tower, standing like a sentinel over nothing? Theories abound. Some believe that the Mushroom War's fallout swept across these lands in a particularly devastating way, evaporating rivers and poisoning the soil. Others whisper of a more mystical disaster, a magical drought that cursed the rain itself, making it vanish before it could ever touch the earth. And there are stranger theories still. In some old adventurous journals, there's mention of a guardian made of pure sand, shaped like a giant serpent, said to have risen in defense of the kingdom during its final days. The serpent fought not against armies, but against the sky itself, as if trying to hold back something falling from above. Was it a meteor, a magical weapon, or some cosmic force? No one knows. What's clear is that whatever happened, the Desert Kingdom could not survive it. Even in its decline, there's evidence the kingdom tried to adapt. Some ruins show signs of being repurposed into underground dwellings, carved deep into the rock where the air stayed cool. Others reveal intricate cistern systems, massive underground reservoirs capable of storing enough water to last through years of drought. But eventually, the desert won. Sand crept in through every crack, swallowed streets, and buried palaces. Curiously, there are subtle signs that the Desert Kingdom may have been a hub of magical knowledge before its fall. Fragments of enchanted pottery have been found, designed to keep water eternally fresh. Old scrolls, though too brittle to fully decipher, seem to describe spells for summoning shade from the air. And then there's the most mysterious relic of all, the sundial of Aribat, a massive stone disk rumored to be hidden somewhere under the sands. Legends claim it could bend time itself, making a single day stretch on for weeks, or pass in the blink of an eye. If such an artifact really existed, one can only imagine what kind of power it would have offered a kingdom living on the edge of survival. Today, all that remains are traces, a lone watchtower casting its shadow over the dunes, shards of a once grand mosaic depicting what might have been the royal crest, a blazing sun above a crescent moon, suggesting a balance between fire and cool night winds. And maybe, just maybe, under the deepest dunes, whole streets still lie preserved, waiting for someone brave enough to dig them free. The few travelers who wander into this part of Oo speak of an odd stillness. Not the peaceful quiet of untouched nature, but something heavier, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Some claim to hear faint music at night, carried on the wind, a slow, mournful tune played on instruments no one has seen in centuries. In the great tapestry of Oo's history, the desert kingdom is a faded thread, barely visible unless you look closely. Yet it's a reminder that for every grand kingdom we remember, there are countless others that lived, thrived, and vanished, leaving behind only their echoes in the sand. The idea of those echoes fascinates historians and adventurers alike. Some wander the dunes with nothing but a compass and a canteen, hoping to uncover a lost market square or a crumbling palace. Others search for the kingdom's fabled archives, which, according to fragments of old sailors' maps, might have been stored deep within a cliffside cavern along the desert's southern border. These archives were said to contain records of alliances, magical treaties, and stories of how the kingdom once traded with far-off realms across Oo. One of the most enduring questions is what the people of the Desert Kingdom were like. In rare surviving art pieces, figures are shown wrapped in long flowing robes, patterned with stars and crescent moons. Their eyes are drawn large, perhaps to suggest they lived comfortably under the brightness of the sun and the clarity of the night sky. Some scholars interpret these designs as purely artistic, but others believe they hint at a people adapted to both day and night living, splitting their activities according to the coolness of the evening and the productivity of daylight. Evidence suggests they were not as isolated as one might assume. A few relics discovered in the ruins bear the unmistakable style of the Fire Kingdom's smithing intricate metalwork, heat-tempered beyond anything the desert's own forges could achieve. This hints at trade routes that may have cut through perilous mountain passes or even underground tunnels. Some legends speak of a flame road, a secret passage lit by enchanted torches that could burn indefinitely without fuel, guiding travelers safely through dangerous stretches of land. Then there is the matter of their spiritual beliefs. Buried in the drifting sands, archaeologists have uncovered strange stone monoliths aligned perfectly with the sunrise during the summer solstice. Each bears the carving of a great bird with outstretched wings, clutching a sun in one talon and a jar of water in the other. The symbolism seems clear reverence for the delicate balance between the heat that sustained life and the water that made it possible. It is believed the royal family saw themselves as guardians of this balance, tasked with ensuring that neither the sun nor the scarce water would dominate or disappear entirely. A few storytellers in Oo still speak of the last ruler of the Desert Kingdom, Queen Serapha of the Gilded Veil. Descriptions of her vary wildly depending on who tells the tale. In some versions, she is a wise and benevolent leader who gave her people everything she could before the desert claimed the land. In others, she is depicted as a ruler obsessed with hoarding magical artifacts to preserve her own life, ignoring the suffering of her subjects. No matter which version you hear, they all end the same way. The queen standing on the highest dune as the sun sets, her silhouette swallowed by the wind and the sands, never to be seen again. Perhaps the most haunting theory about the kingdom's fall ties back to the sundial of Aribad. Some believe Queen Serapha used it to stretch time in the kingdom's final days, creating an endless twilight in which her people could live comfortably while the rest of the world burned in the aftermath of the Mushroom War. But tampering with time is dangerous, and the theory goes that the magic backfired, accelerating the desert's spread instead of halting it. If true, then the very artifact meant to save the kingdom might have been its undoing. Despite its mysterious end, the Desert Kingdom left traces on modern Ulu in subtle ways. Certain lullabies sung in distant villages share the same melodic pattern as the wind songs believed to have originated in the desert. Some decorative patterns seen in Princess Bubblegum's castle tapestries echo the star and moon motifs of desert textiles. Even the way some adventurers tie their cloaks for long journeys matches ancient desert-worn styles, a quiet survival of knowledge passed down through generations without anyone remembering its source. There are still dangers to exploring what's left of the Desert Kingdom. The sands hide sudden sinkholes, and the heat can drain even the hardiest traveler. Some explorers swear that the desert itself doesn't like to be disturbed, that once you've walked too far into its heart, the dunes seem to shift against you, the wind rising to push you back toward the edge. Whether this is just the nature of the desert or something more supernatural remains a mystery. There are even campfire tales of travelers vanishing entirely, their footprints erased within moments as if the desert simply decided to keep them. And yet, for all its dangers, the desert calls to certain souls. Maybe it's the promise of uncovering a long-lost city. Maybe it's the dream of standing in a silent courtyard where no one has set foot in centuries, feeling the weight of history in the stillness. Or maybe it's the quiet magic that lingers there, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear it. There is one story I've always found particularly compelling, the tale of the hidden oasis of Jiran. Supposedly, during the kingdom's final years, a small group of its citizens escaped into the desert with a caravan of camels carrying precious artifacts and knowledge they didn't want falling into enemy hands. Guided by a star map known only to them, they reached an oasis so well concealed that no outsider could ever find it. There they built a miniature version of their homeland, complete with gardens, cool water pools, and a shrine to the great bird deity of the sun and water. According to the legend, the oasis still exists, hidden behind a mirage so convincing that travelers can walk right past without ever seeing it. Some even claim that the descendants of those citizens still live there, wearing the same moon and star robes, speaking an ancient dialect untouched by the modern tongue of Ulu. But of course, no one has ever produced proof. The desert guards its secrets well. Another theory that fascinates scholars is the possibility that the Desert Kingdom was one of the earliest magical research hubs in the post-Mushroom War world. The barren environment would have forced its people to innovate, creating spells to pull moisture from the air, conjure shade from light, or even transform sand into fertile soil. If such knowledge survived, it could explain why certain desert plants today show unusual resilience, some blooming in colors and patterns that no natural species should possess. There's even speculation that the great cactus forests at the desert's edge are remnants of magical agriculture experiments now left to grow wild. The ruins also tell a quiet story about the artistry of the kingdom. Mosaics pieced from polished stones depict scenes of daily life markets, bustling with traders carrying spices and cloth, musicians playing curved stringed instruments under the glow of paper lanterns, and children dancing barefoot on cool tone floors. Though the colors have faded and many tiles are missing, the care in their arrangement is still clear. It's as though the people want to preserve not just their triumphs, but the warmth of their ordinary days. Of all the remnants, perhaps the most intriguing are the watchtowers. These slender, elegant structures rise unexpectedly from the dunes, some leaning at dangerous angles as the sands shift beneath them. No two are alike. Some are carved with patterns of waves, others with flames or birds in flight. Theories suggest they may have been part of a magical communication network, capable of sending messages instantly between towers. If true, the kingdom might have been able to mobilize its defenses faster than any neighboring realm, a skill that may have kept it safe for centuries before its final decline. But even the strongest defenses cannot hold against time itself. There's evidence that the desert was once less severe, with scattered grasslands and small rivers. Over centuries, the climate shifted, perhaps naturally, perhaps accelerated by magical interference, until only the hardiest life remained. Animals like the glass-eyed sand fox and the crimson vulture are thought to be descendants of species that once thrived in a greener age. Some storytellers go further, suggesting that the desert kingdom was not destroyed at all, but transformed. According to this tale, in its final moments, the queen performed a great ritual to merge the land and its people with the spirit of the desert, ensuring they could never be conquered. Their bodies became grains of sand, their voices the whistle of the wind, their eyes the shimmering heat on the horizon. In this way, they still watch over their homeland, invisible to all but the most attuned wanderers. When you stand at the edge of the desert and look out across that vast golden sea, it's easy to imagine a city lying just beyond sight. Walls of pale sandstone gleaming in the sun, banners rippling in the wind, and the soft sound of a distant market drifting on the breeze. Maybe the city is there, hidden in a fold of reality that only opens under the right stars or during the brief hour before dawn. Or maybe it lives only in the memory of the land itself, replayed endlessly for those willing to dream. Even in its absence, the desert kingdom seems to have left fingerprints on the modern age. Some royal courts in wear jewelry styles suspiciously similar to those seen in old desert murals, crescent-shaped pendants and rings carved from desert glass. Certain phrases in ancient poetry from the Ice Kingdom contain words that match no known northern dialect, but closely resemble reconstructed desert language fragments. It's as if bits of the kingdom drifted outward over time, carried by traders, refugees, or perhaps the wind itself. And then there are the artifacts. Every so often, a wandering treasure hunter returns from the desert with a piece of something extraordinary, a cup that keeps water cool no matter the heat, a shard of a mirror that reflects not your face but your dreams, a small bronze charm that hums softly when held at sunset. These finds vanish quickly into private collections or the vaults of kingdoms who understand their value, but each one serves as another quiet reminder that the desert kingdom was once very real and perhaps still has more to offer than the shifting sands suggest. Some say the greatest treasure of the desert kingdom has never been found, the royal map room. According to fragments of oral tradition, this was a vast chamber beneath the palace, its walls carved with a three-dimensional relief of as it once was, before so many kingdoms fell or were remade. The maps were not just drawings, but enchanted constructs, able to shift and change as political borders moved or landscapes transformed. It's whispered that the map even contained places no longer accessible to ordinary travelers, alternate timelines, hidden realms, and kingdoms swallowed by magic. If this map room truly existed, it could explain how the Desert Kingdom maintained an uncanny awareness of distant events. Some adventurers believed the sundial of Erebad and the map room were connected, forming a paired magical system, one to track space, the other to influence time. Together, they might have given the kingdom the ability to anticipate and respond to threats with unmatched precision. It's a theory that paints the desert kingdom not as an isolated backwater, but as one of the most sophisticated civilizations Ooh had never seen. Of course, there are darker versions of the story. In those, the kingdom's mastery over time and space drew the attention of forces far beyond Oo's borders. Perhaps it was not climate or war that ended the desert kingdom, but something older and more patient, a cosmic power that wanted their secrets silenced. Some storytellers claim that on certain nights, under the waning moon, you can see strange lights far out in the dunes, as if the map room still functions in some ghostly capacity, scanning a world its creators no longer walk. The modern perception of the desert kingdom is split between two extremes: the romanticized vision of a golden empire of artistry and wisdom, and the ominous idea of a dangerous, power-hungry civilization whose ambition led to its downfall. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. Civilizations are rarely just one thing. They are both the music in the streets and the strategies in the war room, the farmers tending fields and the mages casting spells in hidden chambers. What we know for certain is that the Desert Kingdom's legacy has seeped into the unconscious fabric of Ooh. You can find it in the architecture of border towns, where rooftops are domed to keep the interiors cool. You can find it in the way desert travelers still carry long, thin blades, designed for both defense and cutting into cacti for water. You can even find it in the playful art of children drawing suns with wide, smiling faces, perhaps an echo of the kingdom's sun and moon crest, remembered without context, but still alive in spirit. Even the land, remember. There are spots in the desert where the wind seems to shift in unnatural ways, forming spirals in the sand that resemble ancient glyphs. The shapes change with the seasons, as if following some forgotten calendar. Locals say these are the desert's way of speaking, marking the passage of time in the same rhythm the kingdom once lived by. There are also places where the sand turns unexpectedly cool, even at midday, hinting that something lies buried just beneath the surface stone streets, perhaps, or the vaults of the old royal court. In recent years, a handful of daring expeditions have tried to systematically map the ruins. Most return empty-handed, their carefully drawn charts blurred by shifting dunes that swallow landmarks overnight. But occasionally, a group will come back with something tangible, a carved doorframe still standing tall, an underground chamber preserved by centuries of dryness, or a mural whose colors burst vividly under the first light of dawn. These small victories fuel the belief that the desert kingdom is not entirely lost, only waiting for the right hands to bring it back into the light. For those who wander its sands, the kingdom is a companion as much as it is mystery. The desert does not speak in loud voices. Its stories come in the creak of ancient stone underfoot, the gleam of glassy sand at sunset, and the faint scent of flowers that only bloom once a decade. If you listen long enough, you might catch a feeling that someone once stood exactly where you are now, gazing at the same horizon, wondering if their world would be remembered. And perhaps that is the truest measure of a forgotten kingdom's endurance. Not in the treasures that survive, nor the maps that remain accurate, but in the way it continues to stir the imagination. Even buried beneath centuries of sand, the desert kingdom still invites us to picture its streets, hear its music, and feel its sun-warmed stones beneath our hands. One day someone may uncover the map room, or find the sundial still ticking away in the shadows, or stumble into the hidden oasis of Jiran and share its wonders with the rest of the world. But until that day comes, the Desert Kingdom will remain a place that lives both in the land and in the dreaming hearts of those who long to see it. And in the grand story of its chapter, though written in the faintest ink, is still part of the book. And so, as the desert night falls and the stars rise over the dunes, the Desert Kingdom rests in silence. Its ruins whisper to the wind, its history hums in the stones, and its spirit drifts over the sands, waiting for the moment when it will once again be seen. The Wildberry Kingdom is one of those places that you could almost walk right past without realizing you've just crossed into a sovereign realm. No towering candy spires like the Candy Kingdom, no flaming battlements like the Fire Kingdom, just a quiet, dense tangle of berry bushes, fruit-laden vines, and cottages shaped like the berries themselves, nestled under a canopy of green. It's easy to mistake it for an ordinary forest at first glance, but spend even a few moments there and you'll notice the air smells sweeter, the ground is softer, and the colors seem just a touch more vivid than in the rest of Wu. The kingdom's ruler, Wildberry Princess, is probably the only part of it that most people know. She appears briefly in the show, offering a glimpse of her personality, polite, poised, and a little formal, but those tiny moments barely scratch the surface of her people's history. In truth, the Wildberry Kingdom has been around far longer than anyone might guess, and its roots, quite literally, run deep into the soil of Wu's past. According to old Wuan folklore, the Wildberry Kingdom began as a single enchanted grove, tended by an ancient gardener who could speak to plants. This gardener was said to have planted the first wildberry bush in the shadow of a massive oak, and with time and magic, the grove expanded into a sprawling network of berry-bearing trees and shrubs. Travelers who stumbled upon it would find food in abundance, and in exchange for a promise not to harm the grove, the plants would bend their branches low so berries could be gathered with ease. Over centuries, the grove grew sentient, forming not only individual personalities for each plant, but a collective awareness, forest mind, that remembered kindnesses and betrayals alike. It's thought that the Wildberry royal line may have been chosen by this forest mind. The first Wildberry princess, according to local legend, was not born of royal blood at all, but was a humble forager who treated the grove with respect and shared its bounty freely. The plants crowned her themselves, weaving a circlet of living vines that never wilted. Whether that story is entirely true or just a bit of charming mythology, the current royal family still holds elaborate seasonal rituals where they ask the forest for permission to rule another year. Outsiders might see it as purely symbolic, but within the kingdom, it's treated as binding. If the forest were ever to refuse, the ruler would step down immediately. Politically, the Wildberry Kingdom occupies an unusual position in Wu. It's small, but its agricultural output makes it quietly important. Many border towns and even the Candy Kingdom itself rely on seasonal imports of berries, jams, and fermented drinks from wildberry lands. That gives the kingdom a degree of leverage after all. Even the sweetest of rulers can sour quickly if their people are hungry. This agricultural influence means that while the Wildberry Kingdom doesn't often flex military power, it can sway trade negotiations and alliances in subtle but effective ways. Yet this influence hasn't come without tension. There are stories of disputes with the Candy Kingdom over farming territory, especially in the fertile valleys that border their lands. The Candy Kingdom, with its vast resources, could easily have overpowered the Wildberry Kingdom in a show of force. But Princess Bubblegum has historically avoided direct conflict with her berry neighbors. Some believe this is because she recognizes the kingdom's value as a friendly supplier. while others whisper that the Wildberry royal family knows secrets about the Candy Kingdom's early years, secrets they could use as political bargaining chips if the need ever arose. Daily life in the Wildberry Kingdom is an idyllic blend of agriculture and artistry. Markets brim with woven baskets, berry wines, medicinal syrups, and desserts, so rich in color they look like jewels. The citizens are deeply connected to the land, tending their berry fields in communal groups and singing traditional work songs to encourage faster growth. While the kingdom embraces trade, it's also fiercely protective of its native plant species. Bringing in foreign seeds without the approval of the Royal Horticultural Council is a serious offense punishable, in extreme cases, by exile from the kingdom. Walking through the kingdom, you might notice something subtle but important. Every building, from the smallest berry-shaped cottage to the modest royal palace, incorporates living plants into its design. Roofs sprout vines. Walls are reinforced with thorny stems that act as natural defenses, and windows are shaded by flowering creepers. It's architecture that blurs the line between structure and nature, a visible reminder that, in the Wildberry Kingdom, the land itself is a partner in governance. Beneath that surface sweetness, though, the Wildberry Kingdom's history is laced with rivalries, quiet betrayals, and the kind of politics that work best in whispers rather than declarations. Much of this stems from the kingdom's location, tucked between resource-rich lands and important trade routes. It's always been in a position that larger powers coveted. Instead of relying on armies, the Wildberry rulers learned to defend themselves with diplomacy, economic sway, and the occasional bit of strategic deception. One of the more famous examples is the Berry Treaty Incident, a centuries-old standoff between the Wildberry Kingdom and a neighboring confection-based duchy that no longer exists. According to surviving accounts, the duchy demanded exclusive rights to the kingdom's rare winter berries in exchange for protection from marauding bandits. The Wildberry court publicly agreed and then, in secret, began cultivating a nearly identical berry that grew in less fertile soil but had a tart, almost unpleasant flavor. They sent these sour berries to the duchy while keeping the true crop for their own trade network. The duchy, unable to prove the deception, lost face in the eyes of Oo's other kingdoms and eventually faded from relevance. This kind of quiet maneuvering became a signature of Wildberry leadership. While their public image remained one of charming hospitality, their diplomats were known to keep detailed dossiers on foreign rulers, noting personal habits, rumored scandals, and even food preferences. Trade meetings often doubled as intelligence-gathering missions, with wine offered a little too generously, and questions slipped into casual conversation. The more information they collected, the more leverage they could exert without ever drawing a sword. Even their relationship with the Candy Kingdom reflects this balance of sweetness and strategy. Old records suggest that the Wildberry Kingdom once supplied a significant portion of the Candy Kingdom's essential fruit-based dyes colors used not just in decoration but in creating certain magical candies. Losing access to those dyes would have been a major blow, so while Princess Bubblegum holds political clout, she also knows the value of keeping the berry fields friendly. On the other side, Wildberry Princess has been careful to never provoke outright hostility, preferring to trade concessions in one area for autonomy in another. Culturally, the kingdom celebrates the balance between sweetness and sourness as both a culinary and political philosophy. Festivals often feature competitions where chefs must create dishes that blend opposing flavors into something harmonious, a symbolic nod to the idea that even opposing forces can coexist when handled with care. Some historians believe this tradition grew out of an older, more practical lesson. that in order to survive between powerful neighbors, the Wildberry Kingdom had to learn to mix just enough sweetness to draw allies and just enough bite to keep enemies cautious. But this careful balancing act hasn't always been perfect. There are old folk tales about the season of rot, when an unknown blight spread through the kingdom's crops. The official story says it was caused by unusual weather and poor soil conditions, but in hushed corners of the market, some still claim it was sabotage by a rival seeking to weaken the kingdom before a major trade summit. The Wildberry court, according to these rumors, identified the culprit but chose not to retaliate openly, instead orchestrating a subtle financial collapse in the rival territory over the next decade. Whether true or not, the story has endured perhaps because it fits so well with the image of a kingdom that wins its battles in the shadows. In more recent times, the Wildberry Kingdom has been less involved in overt politics, especially in the chaotic years after the Mushroom War, when survival took precedence over trade and influence. Yet there's evidence that they played a quiet but critical role in stabilizing certain regions by supplying food where other kingdoms could not. Old merchant logs describe caravans of berry preserves making their way through dangerous, war-torn lands, often guarded by unmarked escorts who answered to no known faction. Some even speculate that without these hidden supply chains, parts of Oo might have fallen into famine. One particularly intriguing theory connects the Wildberry Kingdom to the reemergence of several small settlements in the post-war era. These settlements, scattered across Oo, all seem to share similar agricultural techniques, vertical trellising systems, soil enrichment methods using crushed berry seeds, and specific irrigation patterns. While these could have evolved independently, the similarities are striking enough to suggest they were taught by a single source. Could it be that the Wildberry Kingdom quietly seeded new agricultural knowledge across Oo, ensuring that its influence extended far beyond its borders without ever claiming credit? The Wildberry Kingdom's most mysterious political asset isn't its royal family, its fertile fields, or its skilled diplomats. It's the forest mind. To outsiders, it's a quaint bit of folklore. The idea that the berry groves themselves hold an ancient, collective consciousness. But within the kingdom, the forest mind is treated as both a living archive and an active advisor. Court records, or at least those released to the public, claim that the forest mind's voice can be heard by the reigning monarch during a ceremonial meditation held deep in the oldest grove. There, beneath berry-laden boughs older than the Candy Kingdom itself, the ruler kneels in silence and listens to what the plants have to say. Sometimes they return with visions of good harvests, warnings of pests, or advice on which trade partner to trust. Other times, they emerge pale and shaken, claiming the forest spoke of betrayal, invasion, or calamities years away. Whether this is truly supernatural or simply a ritual for focused reflection, the results are difficult to dismiss. Historical patterns show that when the forest mind advised caution, the Wildberry Kingdom avoided conflicts that later proved disastrous for other nations. When it urged generosity, the kingdom gained long-term allies from well-timed aid. And in one recorded case, the forest mind allegedly instructed the monarch to withhold sweetness from a particular visiting diplomat. That diplomat would later be revealed as a spy for an enemy state. This mystical connection to the land also shapes the kingdom's defensive strategies. Unlike the military forces of other nations, the Wildberry Kingdom's guardians are less about brute strength and more about the environment itself. Certain berry groves are rumored to produce thorned vines that move of their own accord, tangling intruders until they're trapped like flies in a web. Other plants produce clouds of pollen that can induce confusion or drowsiness, effectively neutralizing invaders without bloodshed. Travelers' tales speak of nights spent lost in berry fields, where the paths seem to twist endlessly back on themselves until the stranger gives up and leaves. Still, for all its sweetness and greenery, the kingdom has an unmistakably calculating side when it feels cornered. Some whispers tell of the Sour Purge, a retaliatory campaign against an unnamed ally who broke a critical trade agreement. According to the stories, the Wildberry Kingdom didn't attack with armies. It simply withdrew all shipments of their goods and quietly encouraged rival traders to flood the market with inferior substitutes. The Allies' economy collapsed within seasons, and by the time they came crawling back to the Wildberry court, they were forced to agree to terms far harsher than the original deal. Such maneuvers are rarely documented in official histories. The Wildberry Kingdom prefers to maintain its public image as a gentle, agriculturally rich haven, and to be fair, most of the time, that image is accurate. Life within the berry groves is peaceful, cooperative, and deeply tied to the rhythms of nature. But anyone who mistakes that for naivety risks finding themselves outplayed by a ruler who can turn kindness into a weapon as deftly as a chef balancing sweet and sour on the tongue. Their alliances, too, are woven as subtly as the vines around their cottages. It's believed the kingdom keeps standing pacts with at least 3 other small nations, places like the Mountain Kingdom, and the hidden marshalling enclaves bound not by military treaties, but by mutual trade lifelines. These smaller nations share one thing in common. They, too, rely on unique, hard-to-replace resources. Together, they form a quiet counterweight to the influence of Oo's major powers, like the Fire and Candy Kingdoms. And then there are the stranger rumors, the kind that never make it into any official chronicle, but circulate among merchants and wandering bards. Some say the Wildberry Kingdom has a secret deep harvest, a reserve of enchanted berries grown in sealed underground gardens that are never brought to market. Supposedly, eating even a single one of these berries could grant visions, strengthen the body for weeks, or if the tales are to be believed, cause a person to forget their true loyalties entirely. If such berries exist, they've never been seen by an outsider, though a few wandering traders swear they've glimpsed faint, glowing roots through cracks in the earth near the palace. Whether these are fanciful legends or veiled truths, they fit neatly into the image of the Wildberry Kingdom as a place that thrives in the spaces between sweetness and sourness, peace and subtle power, open hospitality and secret advantage. It's a realm that understands appearances are a kind of currency, and that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a sword or an army, but the quiet control over what the rest of the world eats, drinks, and depends on to survive. When the Mushroom War reshaped the very bones of Oo, the Wildberry Kingdom found itself in a precarious position. Its lands, tucked into fertile valleys and shaded forest glades, were spared the direct devastation of many other regions, but the surrounding world shifted violently. Trade partners vanished overnight, roads were swallowed by strange growths, and once predictable weather patterns became erratic under skies tinged with lingering magical fallout. The first years after the war were, according to scraps of surviving records, a time of cautious withdrawal. Berry production was reduced, not because the crops failed, but because the kingdom understood something most others did not. The first commodity in a new and unstable world is not gold, not weapons, but food. By controlling the flow of their produce, the Wildberry Court ensured they could set terms with any group desperate enough to come knocking. This strategy may be the reason the kingdom emerged from that chaotic period, not only intact, but wealthier in influence. In exchange for safe passage or a steady supply of preserved berry goods, neighboring regions offered raw materials, labor, and even protective military agreements. This wasn't charity, it was calculated survival. A delicate balance between generosity and leverage that the Wildberry Kingdom has refined over centuries. Politically, the war also changed the kingdom's relationships. Once content to act as a minor partner to the Candy Kingdom in matters of trade, the Wildberry monarch began negotiating from a more independent position. While still friendly, the alliance grew more formal, less a relationship of deference and more one of equals. Some historians suggest that Wildberry Princess herself, or perhaps her predecessors, saw in the Candy Kingdom a reflection of what their own realm might become if left unchecked. A centralized state bound tightly around a single figure's authority. In contrast, the Wildberry Kingdom maintained a semi-decentralized structure. Local grove leaders hold a surprising amount of autonomy, able to set policies within their own berry fields as long as they meet the annual sweetness quota, a measure of both yield and quality delivered to the royal stores. This decentralization may seem quaint, but it's part of a clever long-term resilience plan. If one grove is destroyed or falls under hostile control, the others can continue to function largely unaffected. There are, however, darker interpretations of the system. Whispers tell of groves that fell behind on their quota and were quietly absorbed back into the royal holdings, their leaders replaced without public announcement. The berry fields, so vibrant and welcoming to outsiders, can be as politically treacherous for insiders as any court in Ooh. Those who fail to play their part, or worse, betray the kingdom's interests, tend not to be seen again. The modern Wildberry Kingdom is, to most of Ooh, a charming oddity, a land of sweet harvest festivals, purple-stained fingers, and gentle berry folk who barter in jams and pies. But beneath that surface is a deep-rooted legacy of quiet statecraft. Their diplomacy is not the loud proclamation of power, but the careful weaving of dependency. Kingdoms that trade with them often find themselves unable to imagine a world without wildberry goods, and once that reliance takes root, it's difficult to remove without severe consequences. And what of the forest mine in these later days? If the stories are to be believed, its voice has only grown stranger since the Mushroom War. Berry folk speak of monarchs returning from the grove with warnings, not just about politics or weather, but about the movement of stars, the return of ancient enemies, and sweetness turning to rot if certain pacts are broken. Whether this is a heightened form of the old tradition or simply a response to a more chaotic magical landscape, it keeps the kingdom ever attuned to changes beyond their borders. Perhaps the most intriguing modern rumor is that the Wildberry Kingdom is quietly funding expeditions into the ruins of old cities, not to recover gold or weapons, but to search for lost agricultural knowledge. This includes seeds long thought extinct, cultivation techniques erased in the war, and even pre-war preservation technology. If they succeed, they could become not just Ooh's sweetest supplier, but its most essential one, a nation holding the keys to feeding populations in times of scarcity. In the end, the Wildberry Kingdom remains an enigma wrapped in vines. To outsiders, it is a warm welcome, a full plate, and a smiling berry face. To those who watch more closely, it is a masterclass in survival through subtlety, a demonstration that power doesn't always come with armies or thrones of gold. Sometimes it comes in the form of roots that run so deep no storm can pull them up, and in the quiet certainty that sweetness in the right hands can be sharper than any blade. The peaks come into view before you ever reach them. Jagged silhouettes cut into the clouds, their shapes changing with every step you take closer, as if the mountains themselves are shifting, deciding whether you're welcome. This is the Mountain Kingdom, or at least that's what the old maps call it. Today it exists more in whispers and vague gestures toward the horizon than in any official treaty or royal decree. Legends claim that before the Mushroom War, the Mountain Kingdom was one of Oo's most defensible realms. Carved into sheer cliffs and high ridges, its cities clung to stone like barnacles to a ship's hull. The architecture was practical but beautiful. Sturdy stone walls set with polished mineral inlays, rooftops lined with blue-tinged slate that caught the morning sun like glass. Water flowed through intricate aqueducts fed by glacial melt, ensuring the kingdom could thrive even if all the valleys below were in chaos. It's said the first rulers of the Mountain Kingdom were not crowned in golden halls, but on wind-battered plateaus, standing with the clouds at their backs. Their oaths were not to expansion or conquest, but to protection of their people, their resources, and the sanctity of the heights. To outsiders, this came across as stubborn isolationism, but to the mountain folk, it was a simple truth. The world down below changes too quickly and too often for the worse. The mountains endure. This defensive posture served them well for centuries. Natural choke points made invasion almost impossible, and the harsh weather thinned the patience of would-be conquerors. The few wars they did fight were swift, decisive affairs, sudden descents of trained climbers, and rock-cut siege engines that could collapse a path or destroy a bridge in moments. When the threat was gone, the mountain gates would close, and the kingdom would return to its stillness. Some historians believe the Mountain Kingdom became a safe haven for smaller states and wandering peoples in the centuries leading up to the Mushroom War. It was not uncommon for desperate traders or displaced rulers to make the arduous climb in search of asylum. Sometimes they were granted it. Other times, they were turned away, a decision the mountain court reportedly made based on omens, resource calculations, and the unspoken rule that their own survival came first. The war itself is where the record fractures. Lower elevation cities and trade outposts were almost certainly lost in the first waves of destruction. Many of the valley paths would have been cut off by magical contamination, landslides, or deliberate sabotage to prevent invaders from reaching the heights. Those who lived in the heart of the kingdom, the citadels and terraces hidden above the clouds, may have survived much of the chaos with little direct contact with the horrors below. This isolation, however, comes at a cost. While the mountains shielded their people from immediate harm, they also severed many lines of information. Some believed the Mountain Kingdom emerged from the Mushroom War, not knowing the full scale of what had happened to the rest of Oo. In their eyes, perhaps, the valleys had simply gone quiet, swallowed by some disaster they were not yet ready to face. It's even possible they still have not fully grasped the modern shape of the world, a thought that feels eerie, as if somewhere high above the clouds, a whole society is living out an echo of a vanished age. What few accounts we have of the Mountain Kingdom in the centuries after the war come, mostly from travelers who claim to have been there. They describe a strange blend of old-world traditions and subtle adaptations. The markets still trade in mineral goods, preserved meats, and mountain herbs, but newer items scavenge tech. Salvaged magical devices are handled with almost superstitious caution. Outsiders are tolerated, but rarely trusted. Some even claim the mountain folk have kept archives of the pre-war world, stored in cliffside vaults, only accessible by narrow rope bridges or hidden tunnels. If this is true, those records could contain knowledge no other part of Ooh has preserved: maps of forgotten continents, schematics for lost technology, or even first-hand accounts of the days before the war began. Among the most fascinating aspects of these traveler accounts is the way the Mountain Kingdom seems to treat time itself. Down in the lowlands, change as constant kingdoms rise. Rulers fall, borders shift with the tides of war or whimsy, but in the heights, change is measured in centuries, not years. The same stone watchtowers that guarded the cliffs 1,000 years ago still stand, their banners only replaced when the old fabric finally succumbs to the wind. Festivals there are fewer, quieter, and often linked to the rhythm of the land rather than royal decrees. The people celebrate the thaw of the high passes in the late spring, when caravans from the outer valleys can safely climb to trade. They hold solemn vigils during the deepest snows, not in fear, but in acknowledgement of the mountain's authority over all who dwell upon it. Outsiders often mistake this way of life for dourness, but the truth is subtler. The mountain folk live with the understanding that joy, like survival, is a deliberate act. Politically, the kingdom operates under what some scholars call the Council of Peaks. This is not a single monarch ruling from a solitary throne, but a gathering of the most influential family lines from across the mountain settlements. Each council member represents a specific region, a peak, a plateau, or a series of linked cliff villages, and their authority is tied directly to their people's well-being. If a leader fails to keep their region secure, fed, and defended, they can be replaced by a challenger. These replacements are rare, but when they occur, they are carried out with startling swiftness. The council meets in the High Court, a natural amphitheater carved into the side of a mountain, open to the sky. Debates here are said to echo for miles, though many are spoken in a dialect no outsider understands. This deliberate linguistic barrier ensures that any sensitive discussion cannot be fully interpreted by guests, reinforcing the kingdom's long-standing preference for controlling the flow of information. Over the centuries, this political structure has helped the Mountain Kingdom maintain unity in a way many lowland states envy. While valleys and plains are prone to fracturing under pressure, the peaks hold together, bound by the simple fact that every settlement is only as strong as the path that connects it to its neighbors. An avalanche on one route can mean famine for another. A collapsed bridge might sever an entire community. Mutual dependence is not an abstract ideal here. It is a survival requirement. This interconnectedness extends to their defenses as well. Lookouts positioned along the high ridges use long glass lenses and signal fires to communicate over vast distances. Some say they can transmit a warning from one side of the kingdom to the other in less than an hour, a feat few other realms can match, without advanced magical infrastructure. Such systems are rarely needed, but the fact they remain in perfect working order suggests a culture that believes preparedness is as natural as breathing. And yet, for all their unity and careful watchfulness, the Mountain Kingdom has been accused of watching too closely without acting. Lowland kingdoms caught in crises have sometimes looked to the peaks for aid, only to find the gates closed and the paths heavily guarded. The council's reasoning is almost always the same. The mountain's strength must be preserved first, or else it will have nothing to offer anyone later. To outsiders, this is cold pragmatism. To the mountain folk, it is common sense. There are hints, however, that this policy has softened in recent decades. Some modern travelers report being escorted through mountain passes by armed guides, not to keep them out, but to ensure they reach safety. Others tell of caravans laden with supplies appearing unannounced in struggling villages far below, the crates marked only with the carved emblem of a snow-capped peak. Whether this is the work of the council itself or independent factions within the kingdom is unknown. Still, the mountain remains slow to trust. Stories persist of outsiders who overstayed their welcome or sought to exploit the kingdom's resources, only to vanish into the high passes without explanation. The locals will not speak of them, and the silence says more than any denial could. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the Mountain Kingdom is the question of its true size. Official maps of Uu are notoriously inconsistent, especially when it comes to regions shaped by magic, shifting terrain, or forgotten history. The mountain range itself stretches across vast distances, dotted with dozens of peaks and hidden valleys. But no outsider can say with certainty how many of those heights belong to the kingdom, or whether its influence extends beyond the visible ridges into deep, concealed plateaus untouched by lowland eyes. Some theories suggest that the Mountain Kingdom is more of a loose confederation than a clearly bounded realm. Instead of one continuous territory, it might be a network of fortified enclaves connected by secret tunnels, perilous cliffside trails, and passages that disappear in storms and reappear in new places entirely. Such geography would make the idea of conquest nearly impossible. You might take one peak, but 3 others would still stand untouched, waiting for the right moment to strike back. What adds to the enigma is the whispered existence of the Skyhold, a citadel so high that even the clouds rarely reach it. Supposedly, this is where the council keeps its most sacred relics and records, along with vaults of ancient weaponry too dangerous to leave unguarded. Descriptions vary wildly. Some say it's a gleaming palace built from the bones of mountains themselves. Others insist it's a cluster of Spartan halls carved directly into the rock, with no ornamentation at all. No confirmed outsider has ever seen it. Those who claim to have glimpsed it describe the experience less as travel and more like stepping into another realm, as if the air itself changes, thinning to something sharper, more electric. Folklore tells us the Mountain Kingdom is fiercely protective of its resources, not only for survival, but for reasons steeped in old magic. Certain minerals found only in these peaks are said to be key components in long-forgotten enchantments. The kingdom's miners work with extreme precision, guided by rituals that supposedly keep the stone alive, even as it's carved away. If too much is taken, or taken without the proper blessings, the mountains themselves might turn against the intruders. Rock slides, sudden fissures, and paths that close overnight are common warnings in these stories. Then there are the high-altitude gardens. At first glance, they seem impossible. Terraces cut into steep cliff faces, overflowing with hardy alpine fruits, frost-resistant grains, and herbs found nowhere else in Uu. According to some accounts, the soil itself is imported from sacred valleys far below and replenished only during rare ceremonial processions. These gardens are guarded as jealously as any fortress, for they ensure that even in the most brutal winters, the mountain folk can feed themselves without relying on dangerous trade routes. Relations with other kingdoms are a delicate dance. While they rarely engage in formal alliances, the Mountain Kingdom has been known to negotiate resource exchanges in times of mutual need. The terms are often exacting one wrong move, one unfulfilled promise, and the gates close again for years. It's possible that these interactions serve as tests as much as transactions. Ways of assessing whether a potential partner can be trusted to respect the mountain's ways. There's also the matter of the kingdom's warriors. They are not a standing army in the traditional sense, but a collection of highly trained specialists drawn from across the peaks. Some are climbers who can scale sheer rock faster than most can run on flat ground. Others are masters of slings, bows, and weapons designed to strike from above. Then there are the rumored wind speaker scouts who can read the shifting patterns of the air and predict storms or avalanches hours before they happen. In the labyrinth of the mountains, such foresight can mean the difference between victory and extinction. Interestingly, outsiders often report that these warriors are not quick to draw blood unless absolutely necessary. Instead, they prefer to win without fighting collapsing paths, redirecting enemies into dead ends, or isolating them until hunger or cold forces surrender. This strategy reinforces the mountain's image as a realm of patience and precision, where victory is not about crushing an opponent, but simply outlasting them. In a way, that philosophy mirrors the kingdom itself. The mountain kingdom doesn't need to conquer or expand. It simply needs to endure. And in the slow, deliberate passage of centuries, endurance often proves to be the most powerful weapon of all. Legends passed down by wandering bards speak of a time when the mountain kingdom wasn't quite so closed off. They tell of an age when the peaks welcomed travelers with open gates, trading knowledge and goods as freely as the rivers flowed below. Some stories even claim that long before the Mushroom War, the kingdom was a hub for inventors and sages, its high halls filled with scholars who studied the stars, winds, and deep earth. They say that inventions now lost to flying machines, weather callers, and stone-bound guardians were all born in the mountain forges and workshops. If these tales are true, then something changed. Perhaps it was betrayal from the outside or disaster from within, but whatever the cause, the kingdom turned inward. Gates that once stood open became barred. The great meeting halls fell silent to strangers. The Council of Peaks stopped sending emissaries to the lowlands except in times of dire necessity. Over time, the memories of that open-handed age faded, replaced by the image we know today, a kingdom that is both fortress and sanctuary, unyielding as a stone it sits upon. The people themselves carry this history in their bones. Mountain folk grow up learning to read the land as others read books. They can tell the difference between a harmless rumble of shifting ice and the first growl of an avalanche. They can track the migration of frostbirds by the pattern of their calls, and they know which herbs to gather when the winter sickness strikes. Even their lullabies are filled with warnings, gentle reminders that life here is as beautiful as it is dangerous. Visitors often remark on the quiet dignity of the mountain settlements. Houses are built of stone and timber, fitted so precisely that no wind can whistle through the cracks. Roofs are steep to shed snow, chimneys carved in ways that keep smoke from betraying a home's location to any who might be watching from afar. Every window seems to frame a view of distant peaks, reminding the people that they are part of something far larger than themselves. Yet for all its defenses and wary traditions, the mountain kingdom is not entirely untouched by change. Younger generations have grown curious about the world beyond the ridges. They hear stories from traders who brave the passes, stories of strange creatures, magical forests, and kingdoms rebuilt from ruins. Some dream of exploring these lands, of seeing if the old stories of openness can be made true again. This quiet tension between tradition and curiosity is said to be growing. On one hand, the Council of Peaks maintains that the safety of the kingdom depends on its isolation. On the other, the restless youth see opportunity in forging new bonds. If the elders are guardians of the old ways, the younger voices are like thawing rivers determined to break through the ice and carve a new path. Whether this will lead to renewal or ruin, no one can yet say. One particularly persistent rumor claims that a hidden envoy of the Mountain Kingdom has already been sent into the wider world, tasked with secretly mapping out alliances, resources, and potential threats. If such a mission exists, it would mark the first deliberate outward reach in centuries. But of course, the Council would never confirm such a thing, and perhaps that secrecy is exactly the point. Standing in the shadow of those great peaks, it's easy to see why the kingdom inspires such awe. The mountains themselves seem to hum with ancient power, their snowcaps gleaming like crowns in the fading light. Every path that winds upward carries with it the weight of history, the echo of footsteps taken by countless generations. Here the air is thin, but the sense of purpose is thick, woven into every stone and every heartbeat. To the Mountain Kingdom, survival isn't about resisting change forever. It's about ensuring that when change comes, the peaks are ready to meet it on their own terms. And perhaps that is the truest definition of strength in all of Uu, to endure not just by standing still, but by knowing exactly when to move. As the last light fades behind the jagged horizon, the mountain settles into its nightly watch, silent but vigilant. Somewhere in the darkness, a signal fire burns a tiny, flickering reminder that even in isolation, the kingdom remains alert, its gaze fixed on both the world below and the future above. Tonight we're turning our lanterns toward those half-glimpsed realms, the ones without official names, maps, or full histories. These are the places that live mostly in whispers, scribbled notes in old episodes, or a quick flash of scenery behind our favorite characters. Some of them might have been grand kingdoms in their day. Others may be only strange little communities clinging to survival on the edges of Uu's sprawling patchwork. All of them, though, carry a certain magic, the kind of mystery that lets our imaginations run wild. One of the earliest examples that comes to mind is that stretch of strange, twisting towers seen beyond the Candy Kingdom in certain panoramic shots. They're never formally introduced, never labeled, but they stand there like a frozen forest of stone, each spire spiraling up in ways that defy normal building logic. Were they carved by ancient magic? Are they the bones of some long-forgotten colossus, overgrown and claimed by settlers? The show never says, which, in a way, makes them all the more compelling. Then there's that fleeting moment in the distance during the Eyes episode, where Finn and Jake are outside at night, and if you pause at just the right time, you'll spot what looks like a glowing walled settlement far off under the stars, never visited. The story never even acknowledges it, but there it is proof that other lives and other stories are unfolding just beyond the frame. Fans have speculated endlessly about this place. Some say it's a forgotten outpost of the Fire Kingdom. Others think it might be a surviving fragment of pre-Mushroom War civilization, lit by strange energy rather than flame. Another favorite of mine is the shimmering patch of ice palaces glimpsed during long aerial shots of Uu's colder regions. Not Ice King's domain, no, these are too far out, too clean and symmetrical, with a style more like crystal than jagged frost. Could this have been a rival ice court? Maybe a neutral kingdom of ice artisans who traded with multiple realms before vanishing beneath the snow. The absence of answers leaves only possibilities. Even in episodes that focus entirely on familiar places, there are often these little background gems, like that village of mushroom-shaped houses in the far background during the Hitman episode. Blink, and you'll miss it. But if you catch it, you can't help but wonder, did the Mushroom War leave behind literal mushroom folk? Or was that a settlement that took its architectural inspiration from something long lost to their own culture? What fascinates me most is how these unnamed places add depth to Ooh without demanding the spotlight. They remind us that the world is bigger than any single hero's journey, that there are stories happening just out of sight, beyond the borders of maps we've been given. And if we pause and look, we start to see the delicate threads that might connect them all. Some of these realms might be abandoned, reduced to ruins like the Desert Kingdom. Others could still be thriving, their people choosing to remain apart from the chaotic alliances and rivalries of the better-known kingdoms. But in a land shaped by the fallout of cataclysm, any place that survives even quietly carries a history worth telling. One particularly strange fragment of Ooh's map appears only in a single shot from the real you, when Finn and Jake look out over the horizon. Off in the haze is a cluster of shapes that seem not quite natural. Smooth, rounded domes, each one marked with faintly glowing lines, almost like circuitry. Fans have speculated that this could be a relic zone, a place where pre-Mushroom War technology still hums quietly under the surface. If true, it might be one of the last untouched vaults of that old world, hidden in plain sight but protected by terrain too treacherous for casual explorers. Then there's the tiny island with a single crooked tower, glimpsed during one of Ice King's skyward flights. It doesn't look like much, just a bent spire of stone capped with a little roof, but it raises questions. Who built it? Why choose an isolated sea rock instead of the mainland? Was it a hermit's refuge, a lighthouse for ships that no longer sail? Or perhaps a magical outpost meant to guard something deep beneath the waves? The camera moves on before we can get closer, and the tower remains an enigma. Some of these realms hide themselves not in distance, but in plain sight. In the Thank You episode, there's a quiet moment where we see a remote forest village inhabited by strange, animal-like people. It's tender and self-contained, its culture revolving around the rhythms of the woods. They seem utterly untouched by the politics of the Candy or Fire Kingdoms, living in peace until danger comes to their doorstep. It's a gentle reminder that even in a world reshaped by magic and war, there are pockets where life follows its own quiet rules. There's also a blink and you miss it scene in Another Way, when Finn stumbles into a misty valley dotted with moss-covered statues. The episode treats it as a passing backdrop, but the implication is rich. Were those statues once people? Were they carved to honor forgotten heroes, or to keep some ancient power sealed away? The mist rolls over them like a blanket, and we move on. But the valley's quiet weight lingers. And we can't forget the strange, jagged coastline, sometimes seen in shots of Ooh's far edges, spiked cliffs rising from stormy water, with ruins just visible between the rocks. They look almost like shattered teeth jutting into the sea. Some theorists believe this could be the remains of an entire coastal city swallowed by tides after the Mushroom War. If so, perhaps some part of it still lies beneath the waves, preserved in eerie stillness, waiting for a day when the ocean recedes. Even the skies hold their secrets. In certain wide shots, faint floating islands drift far above the clouds. They're too distant to make out clearly, but sometimes you'll catch a glint sunlight on metal or a flash of something moving across the surface. Are they home to sky tribes who've never set foot on the land? Or are they remnants of old experiments in levitating cities left to wander the upper air? The thought that whole communities could live up there, unseen, adds another layer to Ooh's vastness. What ties all these glimpses together is that they ask us to fill in the blanks. The show never pins them down with neat explanations, and that restraint makes them more alive in a way. It's as though the creators are saying, "You saw that too, right? Now go ahead, imagine the rest." Among the most intriguing of these hidden corners is a set of structures glimpsed only for a second in the Lich, when Finn and Jake are moving between realms. Behind them, barely visible in the layered scenery, is what looks like a city carved directly into the side of a colossal cliff. Rows of rectangular openings form a honeycomb pattern stretching hundreds of feet up. It's not the same jagged, natural stone we've seen in other mountain settings. This feels deliberate, engineered. Maybe it was once a vertical kingdom, its people living in stacked chambers connected by rope bridges and carved staircases. A city that could defend itself simply by pulling up its ladders and letting the walls of the cliff become an unscalable shield. Another favorite detail, one that almost no casual viewer notices, comes during the pods. In the distance behind the main action, there's a broken archway jutting out of a hilltop, standing alone like the last tooth in a ruined jaw. Nothing else remains of whatever structure it belonged to. Was it a gate to a walled settlement? Or the entrance to some ceremonial site? The fact that it's still upright after all this time speaks to craftsmanship meant to last, and possibly to magic that refuses to let it crumble. Sometimes these unnamed realms aren't so much kingdoms as they are artifacts of worlds gone by. Take the series of crumbling bridges shown in the background during Henchmen. Each bridge stretches across a canyon, broken in the middle, with no living travelers in sight. The gaps are too wide to cross without flight or magic. Were these once busy trade routes between two great cities, now both lost? Or perhaps they were built by giants, whose long legs made such spans trivial until the giants themselves disappeared. One realm that fascinates theorists shows up only on the most obsessive rewatch. A dark, swampy zone, all gnarled trees and glowing fungi, seen in a sweeping pan during the limit. It's eerie, but not empty if you look closely. Faint lantern lights flicker among the roots. Someone lives there, though the show never gives them a name. Some fans have dubbed it the Lantern Marsh, imagining it as a neutral ground where travelers from all corners of Ooh pass through, guided by the soft glow through the mist. We also catch a glimpse in the great Birdman of a sprawling field of massive gears, half-buried and rusted. These gears are too large to belong to any ordinary machine. Each one could be the width of a small building. It suggests the ruins of a titanic mechanism, maybe a construct that once altered the landscape itself, or even an abandoned weapon from the Mushroom War. If a civilization built its home in the shadow of such a device, they might have drawn their culture, and perhaps even their religion, from its silent presence. Not all of these glimpsed places feel ancient or ruined. Some appear alive and thriving, for example, the mysterious Cobalt City that can be spotted in beyond this earthly realm. Just for a moment, Finn's vision passes over tall, sleek towers with glowing blue lines tracing their edges. The architecture feels too clean to be relics and too advanced to be handmade without magic or lost technology. If it's still inhabited, that city might be one of the most technologically sophisticated enclaves left in Ooh, quietly existing beyond the notice of major kingdoms. And then there's my personal favorite, the ring of standing stones glimpsed at sunset during hoots. The stones are arranged in a perfect circle, each one carved with patterns too eroded to read. Standing stones often serve as markers, calendars, or magical wards in other fantasy settings, so it's easy to imagine this as a meeting place for druids, wizards, or ancient monarchs seeking to bargain under the open sky. Whether the magic still hums in those stones or has faded entirely, that's for us to dream about. Each of these places, from the cliff cities to the Cobalt Towers, is a reminder that Ooh's map is dotted with more than just the kingdoms we know. It's a patchwork quilt where every stitch has a story, even if no one is left to tell it. One of the most tantalizing hints of a forgotten realm comes in Evergreen during the ancient flashbacks. When the comet's approach fills the sky, there's a quick, almost throwaway view of a landscape far from where the main characters are. It's a city of sharp, crystalline towers glinting in the dying light. The style doesn't match the Candy Kingdom's sugary curves or the Fire Kingdom's molten architecture. It's clean, geometric, and alien. Some fans theorize it may not even be part of Ooh proper, but rather an outpost belonging to a civilization that predates the Mushroom War by centuries. The fact that it's never mentioned again makes it feel like a ghost of a dream you can't quite hold on to. Another mystery hides in the far north, where the ice sheets meet jagged cliffs. In Reign of Gunters, as the chaos unfolds, the camera briefly catches what looks like a vast, frozen amphitheater carved right into a glacier. It's perfectly symmetrical, with tiered seating and a central platform, a place clearly built for gatherings or performances. But in such a cold and dangerous region, who would have gathered there? Was it a site for diplomacy between frost-bound peoples? Or perhaps a court for the Ice King's predecessors? The idea of voices once carrying through that icy air before being swallowed by centuries of snow is strangely haunting. One of the most surreal realms flickers into existence during Puhoi, when Finn slips between dimensions. In the corner of the screen, past the rolling fields, there's a city built on massive stilts, high above a floodplain. Water glitters beneath the structures, but it's unclear whether the flooding is seasonal or permanent. This style of construction suggests a culture that adapted to living with the water rather than fighting it, perhaps trading by boat between their high platforms. If such a place exists in Ooh's real map, it might be hidden in one of the swampy regions we rarely see. In The Duke, a faint silhouette appears during a distant establishing shot, an enormous tree unlike anything else in the series. It towers above the forest canopy, its trunk wider than a castle, with branches supporting what appear to be platforms, bridges, and even small houses, a living kingdom in the boughs. We never get close enough to confirm if it's inhabited, but it's easy to imagine an entire community existing in harmony with the tree, never setting foot on the ground. A place where the seasons are marked by blossoms high above the clouds. There's also a curious ruin, glimpsed during the New Frontier when Jake dreams of traveling to the Croak Dream place. In one sequence, a desert plain is shown dotted with colossal statues half buried in sand. The statues are humanoid but wear no crowns, and their hands are clasped in front of them as though in solemn ceremony. Could this be the burial ground of an extinct race, or perhaps a cultural memory carved in stone to warn travelers of some ancient calamity? With no context, the statues remain silent sentinels of a forgotten time. And perhaps the most chilling background detail of all in Dark Purple, when the camera pans past a section of the Candy Kingdom's outskirts, there's a collapsed structure jutting from the earth. At first, it looks like rubble, but if you pause and study it, you'll see what appears to be a massive, overturned crown. Not the Ice King's, not Princess Bubblegum's, something older and far larger. Whatever ruler wore that crown must have been a giant among giants, and their kingdom may have stretched across lands now swallowed by forests, rivers, and candy-coated buildings. These unnamed realms feel like secret passages in the architecture of the show itself. They're there for only the most watchful viewers, rewarding curiosity with questions rather than answers. Each glimpse is like a loose thread, and if you pull too hard, it unravels into a tapestry you'll never finish weaving. And maybe that's the magic of them. In a world as colorful and chaotic as Ooh, not everything needs a map or a name. Some places live best in the in-between, half real and half dream, waiting for someone to notice them again, even if that someone is just us, in the quiet hours under a blanket, letting the images drift through our minds like half-remembered stories from a past we never lived. You know, when you start laying out the puzzle pieces of all these forgotten kingdoms, the desert kingdom's sun-bleached ruins, the Wildberry Kingdom's quiet but stubborn politics, the mountain kingdom's snow-wrapped citadels, and all those unnamed realms hiding in the corners of the frame, a pattern begins to emerge. Not a neat, tidy pattern like stripes on a candy cane, but something more like rings in a tree trunk, layers of history, each telling the story of growth, triumph, decline, and eventually silence. If you listen closely to Ooh's history, you'll notice that kingdoms don't tend to last forever. They rise, they make their mark on the world, and then, whether by war, disaster, or slow erosion, they fade. The Candy Kingdom itself, for all its sugar-frosted charm, has skirted the edge of collapse more than once. So when we look at the forgotten kingdoms, we're not just peeking into random curiosities. We're seeing echoes of the same cycles playing out over and over. One common thread seems to be geography. Many of these lost realms were founded in places that gave them an immediate advantage: fertile valleys, high mountain passes, natural harbors, or resource-rich deserts. The Desert Kingdom may have once thrived along ancient riverbeds, trading with other realms for food, gems, and magical artifacts. The Mountain Kingdom, perched among icy ridges, likely controlled passes that connected northern and southern territories, charging tolls and keeping a watchful eye on invaders. But that same geography could also be their undoing. A river dries up and a city turns to dust. A volcanic eruption seals a mountain pass in molten rock. A shift in climate turns farmland to tundra. When you live in a magical, mutation-filled world like Ooh, the environment isn't just a backdrop, it's a fickle, sometimes vengeful character in the story. Another pattern is power centralization. Many of these kingdoms seem to have revolved around a single, often larger-than-life ruler. That ruler might have been a brilliant strategist, a beloved figurehead, or a terrifying despot, but in every case, the fate of the kingdom was tied to them personally. And when they fell, the kingdom fell with them. Without a clear succession plan, alliances fracture, generals squabble, and ordinary citizens are left to fend for themselves. The collapse becomes inevitable. Trade is another fascinating factor. Kingdoms that dominated trade routes tended to rise faster, amassing wealth and influence beyond their borders. But with that came jealousy and conflict. A rival kingdom might blockade their roads, pirates might harass their ports, or a charismatic leader from another land might tempt their allies away. In the blink of an eye, prosperity turns into a liability. The very wealth that attracted friends now attracts enemies. Then there's the wild card of magic. Magic can make a kingdom flourish, but it's a dangerous foundation to build on. We've seen how magical experiments, even well-intentioned ones, can spiral out of control in Ooh. Maybe an ancient realm relied on enchanted crops that suddenly stopped growing, or a magical defense system became self-aware and turned on its creators, or a curse, cast in desperation during a siege, lingered for centuries and drove the last inhabitants away. And of course, we can't forget the shadow of the Mushroom War. Even the most remote kingdoms would have felt its shockwaves, whether from radiation, magical mutations, or the breakdown of old alliances. Some kingdoms may have been wiped out in the initial chaos. Others might have survived the war itself, only to slowly wither in the harsh, altered world it left behind. In a place like Ooh, sometimes survival isn't about the big battles. It's about whether you can adapt when the entire world changes shape overnight. As we wander through these histories, we start to see that the fall of a kingdom isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's not a fiery end with collapsing towers and fleeing citizens. Sometimes it's a slow, quiet fading. A generation leaves for better opportunities elsewhere. A vital tradition is forgotten. One day the streets are empty and no one remembers when it happened. The kingdom isn't conquered. It just stops being. When you step back and think about it, the story of these forgotten realms is almost like the story of a campfire. At first, it blazes brightly, fueled by fresh wood and careful tending. People gather around, basking in the warmth, sharing stories, and feeling safe in the glow. But as time passes, the wood burns down, the flames shrink, and unless someone keeps feeding it, the fire turns to embers, then ashes. In Ooh, the wood for a kingdom might be resources, alliances, or a shared cultural identity. The moment those start to run low, you can almost hear the crackle fading. That's why many successful kingdoms work tirelessly to maintain traditions and rituals. They weren't just being sentimental. Those customs reminded people who they were and why their home mattered. Lose that sense of identity, and it's not long before the population starts to drift away, seeking somewhere that still feels alive. The Desert Kingdom may have been a prime example. Once the rivers dried and trade diminished, its people might have migrated toward more fertile lands. Over generations, its name could have become just a story told by traveling merchants, until even the merchants stopped telling it. Likewise, the Wildberry Kingdom might have faced political fractures when smaller berry clans broke away, deciding the central authority no longer represented their needs. Without unity, even the sweetest empire can sour. And then there's the role of external pressures. In many cases, it's not just one disaster that brings a kingdom down. It's several, arriving like waves. Maybe the Mountain Kingdom survived a terrible blizzard one year, but then a mining accident collapsed their main trade tunnel the next. Or an outbreak of a magical illness swept through the population, leaving their borders undefended. In those moments of vulnerability, neighboring powers often step in. Sometimes they offer help, but more often they seize land, resources, or political influence. I think what's most fascinating is how some kingdoms try to prevent this decline. You see traces of it in ruins and oral histories, massive storehouses built to last decades, enchanted walls designed to repel any invader, elaborate political marriages meant to bind distant realms together. These were not naive societies. They understood the risks. They tried to outwit time itself. But time in Ooh is a stubborn force. Wars end, seasons change, magic shifts, and the kingdoms that seemed unshakable crumble just like the rest. There's also the matter of legacy. Some kingdoms vanish entirely, leaving only ruins and half-forgotten songs. Others transform into something else, their name erased, but their influence lingering in new cultures. For example, a surviving population might integrate into a larger neighboring kingdom, blending traditions until the origin is almost unrecognizable. A pastry you eat in the Candy Kingdom today might have once been the national dessert of a realm that no one even remembers. The repeated rise and fall pattern suggests something almost natural about the process. It's as if kingdoms are living beings themselves. They're born, they grow, they age, and they die. But in their death, they leave seeds that can sprout in unexpected places. A language might evolve into a dialect spoken in a tiny fishing village. A type of armor design might resurface centuries later in a completely different army. These echoes are quiet, but they're everywhere if you know how to look. Some historians in the real deep-cut scholars, the ones who prefer dusty scrolls to swords, even suggest that the great kingdoms of today are already somewhere in this life cycle. The Candy Kingdom, the Fire Kingdom, even the Ice Kingdom, all of them, might one day be reduced to legends, their lands occupied by new powers. It's a thought that feels both melancholy and oddly comforting. Because if history keeps repeating itself, maybe it means will always have stories to tell, no matter how many centuries pass. Another recurring element in the pattern is the myth-making phase. When a kingdom starts to falter, leaders, whether kings, councils, or sorcerers, often try to bind the people together with grand narratives. These stories might exaggerate past victories, invent heroic ancestors, or promise a glorious destiny that lies just ahead. The goal isn't only morale, it's control. A unified belief can keep citizens loyal long enough to repair the cracks. But in myths can also become traps. When rulers cling too hard to an idealized version of the past, they risk ignoring the real threats right outside their borders. A king who insists his armies are unmatched might dismiss reports of a neighboring kingdom's new magical weapons. A queen who believes her realm is blessed by ancient spirits might ignore the signs of a failing harvest, trusting the spirits will provide. In both cases, the gap between story and reality grows, and the fall hits harder when it finally comes. Another fascinating feature of these cycles is how some kingdoms choose withdrawal over confrontation. Instead of fighting to keep their borders or resources, they retreat. We see traces of this in certain isolated villages that speak an archaic dialect or maintain architecture completely different from surrounding lands. It's possible these were once citizens of larger realms who decided survival was more important than pride. They carried their customs into remote valleys, high peaks, or forest glades, letting the outside world forget them while they quietly preserved what they could. Natural disasters are another wild card in the rise and fall story. Is a land where magic can twist the weather, monsters can reshape landscapes overnight, and the earth itself holds grudges. A volcanic eruption could bury a capital city in hours. An enchanted drought might last a decade, shrinking a lush kingdom into a desert. Even something as small as a river shifting course could force an entire population to move, leaving behind ghost towns for vines and roots to reclaim. The Mushroom War, of course, is the ultimate disruptor in nearly every historian's timeline. For many kingdoms, it wasn't just an ending, it was a reset button. Political boundaries meant nothing in the face of total upheaval. Kingdoms that had existed for centuries were erased in moments, while others survived purely by chance, a mountain range blocking the worst of the blasts, or a magical barrier activated just in time. In the centuries after, new powers rose from the rubble, some built directly atop the bones of the old. The Fire Kingdom, for instance, might owe parts of its infrastructure to civilizations that existed before the flames were ever royal. What's particularly striking is that even in the ruins, signs of adaptation emerge quickly. Abandoned cities become scavenger hubs. Collapsed kingdoms leave behind knowledge, tools, and treasures for others to claim. A fallen palace might be gutted and rebuilt as a marketplace by a nomadic clan. Magic artifacts forgotten in vaults may resurface in the hands of wandering adventurers, reshaping the balance of power elsewhere. The fall of one kingdom can be the fuel for another's rise, creating a web of inheritance that stretches across ooze history. The human or candy, or elemental response to these cycles is often the same. Tell the story in a way that gives meaning to the loss. That's why so many ruins are accompanied by songs, carvings, or whispered tales. These aren't just memorials, they're a way of claiming that the fall wasn't pointless. Even if the kingdom is gone, its story survives, and as long as someone remembers, there's a spark of immortality in it. Patterns like these give us a roadmap for understanding ooze forgotten realms. They may look like random tragedies scattered through history, but when you line them up, you start to see the rhythm: build, flourish, fracture, fall, and echo. It's almost like ooh itself breathes through these kingdoms, inhaling as they rise, exhaling as they fade. And if that's true, then every ruin we see is just one heartbeat in a much longer pulse. One more piece of the puzzle worth noticing is how often the remnants of these fallen kingdoms become the seeds of future powers. When a realm collapses, its survivors rarely vanish completely. Instead, they scatter, carrying fragments of their old identity, the dialect, the recipes, the architectural style, the magic rituals into the places where they resettle. Over time, these fragments blend with the local culture, creating something new. Sometimes that blending is obvious. You might walk through a bustling candy market and spot a single stall selling a strange, spiced dessert that's unlike anything else around a delicacy from a long-gone marshland kingdom kept alive by one stubborn family. Other times, the inheritance is invisible until you look closely. A fortress wall in the Fire Kingdom might be built with the exact pattern of stonework once favored by a mountain realm far to the north. The connection isn't recorded anywhere, but it's there in the way the blocks interlock, passed down from mason to mason. The opposite also happens. Kingdoms that survive absorb the remnants of the fallen, reshaping themselves in the process. This is how subtle shifts in politics occur. New advisors entering the royal court, new fighting styles taught to the army, new gods slipping into the pantheon. In some cases, the change is so gradual no one notices until centuries later, when a historian points out that the ruling family's crest has changed colors, or a holiday now celebrates an event that happened far outside their original borders. It's tempting to think of these rises and falls as purely tragic, but there's an undeniable beauty in how ooh recycles its own history. Each collapse feeds into the soil of the next era, and the lessons or mistakes of the old world ripple forward. The challenge, of course, is whether anyone recognizes the pattern in time to break it. Most kingdoms don't. History has a way of wearing a disguise, showing up in new clothes so no one realizes they've danced this same waltz before. For example, a small coastal kingdom might start expanding its navy, patrolling waters far from its own shores. At first it feels like a golden age trade is booming, confidence is high. But if you compare this moment to a similar rise in a kingdom 3 centuries earlier, the ending becomes easier to guess. Overextension, rising enemies, and eventual collapse when the fleets can no longer protect every outpost. Without that historical perspective, the leaders might mistake ambition for destiny. Even the greatest kingdoms are never immune. The Candy Kingdom, for all its apparent stability, has faced threats that could have set it on the same downward spiral. The only difference is that its leadership, whether by wisdom or luck, managed to avoid certain pitfalls, at least for now. But if you look closely, some of those old warning signs are still there. Dependency on a single ruler, alliances held together by fragile trust, and the constant presence of unpredictable magical forces. And here's the truly fascinating thing. In Ooh, the cycle doesn't always end in total ruin. Some kingdoms manage a soft fall. Instead of being erased, they shift into a smaller, more sustainable form. A sprawling empire might retreat to a single, fortified city and thrive there for centuries. A once powerful magical court might become a nomadic caravan, traveling through friendly territories in exchange for their wisdom and entertainment. These softer landings often leave richer, more complete histories the people are alive to tell them after all. So when we wander through the landscapes of Ooh, past the deserts, the forests, the mountains, and the coastlines, we're really walking through layers of lives. Each hill might hide the foundations of an ancient throne room. Each trail could be following the route of an old trade road, and every festival, every lullaby, every architectural flourish might carry the DNA of a kingdom that once rose high, burned bright, and slipped quietly into memory. In the end, the rise and fall pattern is less about kingdoms themselves and more about the people who live through them. The ruins don't mourn their builders. The people do. And it's the people, their stories, their migrations, their stubborn clinging to pieces of home that keep Ooh's forgotten kingdoms from truly disappearing. The cycle may turn endlessly, but in those moments where the past resurfaces in the present, the line between rise and fall blurs. What we're left with is not just a record of endings, but an unbroken thread of adaptation, survival, and quiet rebirth. Hey there, sleepyheads. We've wandered through deserts of whispering sand, strolled past the candy-scented corridors of Wildberry palaces, climbed the lonely peaks of the Mountain Kingdom, and tiptoed through realms so fleeting they barely made the map. Now let's take a step back. Instead of looking at these kingdoms in isolation, we're going to weave them into the larger tapestry, the grand, messy, beautiful history of Ooh. Because none of these places existed in a vacuum. Every forgotten throne, every crumbled watchtower, every half-told myth about a vanished ruler, they're all threads in a much bigger story. If you were to lay out Ooh's history on a giant loom, you'd find these kingdoms' patterns tucked between the more famous events, the Mushroom War, the Great Gum Rebellions, the reigns of powerful figures like Princess Bubblegum or the Ice King. They're not just side notes. They're the connective tissue that makes the rest of the story make sense. Let's start with a simple truth. In Ooh, borders are illusions. They change with the seasons, the wars, and sometimes just the whim of a magical being. A mountain range that marked the edge of the Mountain Kingdom in one century might sit in the heart of another empire the next. And that's where these connections start to emerge. The rise of one kingdom often means the shrinking of another. The flourishing desert kingdom we explored, its wealth in trade caravans didn't just appear from nowhere. It came from redirecting ancient spice routes that once belonged to a coastal trading power, weakening that rival until it withered away. These cause and effect chains are everywhere if you look for them. The Wildberry Kingdom's political games, for instance, may have been small-scale compared to the sprawling schemes of the Candy Kingdom, but they had ripple effects. A marriage alliance here, a trade treaty there, and suddenly the power balance between sugar-based monarchies shifts. Maybe a certain noble family in the Candy Kingdom finds its influence waning, prompting them to sponsor expeditions into the unclaimed territories of the Mountain Kingdom. And so a new conflict begins, sparked by decisions made in a place that barely got a footnote in the royal chronicles. The Mountain Kingdom itself played an unexpected role in shaping Ooh's later geography. Its isolationist policies meant it never expanded far, but its mountain passes became strategic choke points. Control of those passes meant control over the flow of goods and sometimes armies. The kingdoms that could persuade or bribe the Mountain King into granting them passage often gained the upper hand in larger conflicts. It's a quiet power, but a decisive one. Even the tiniest unnamed realms, the ones we spotted only in a single background frame, might have had their moment of influence. Imagine a small river kingdom whose entire economy revolves around a rare magical flower. One year, that flower fails to bloom. The local rulers, desperate, sell their lands to a neighboring power in exchange for food and protection. That neighbor, now holding a crucial river crossing, uses it to launch a campaign that changes the course of history. In the big books of Oo's past, it might look like a sudden military victory, but the real cause began with a quiet drought in a kingdom that no longer exists. When you start seeing the web this way, the grand history of Oo stops being a neat list of major events and starts looking like a living ecosystem. Every decision, every accident, every forgotten negotiation leaves a mark. The Mushroom War might have been the great breaking point, but the shape of post-war Ao, the territories, the alliances, the lingering grudges was built on centuries of these smaller rises and falls. And here's the strange, comforting part. Even when a kingdom disappears, its threads in that tapestry don't vanish. They get woven into new colors, new patterns. A dance that began in a sunlit desert courtyard might echo centuries later in the way a distant mountain festival is celebrated. A lullaby from a riverside fishing village might find its way into the royal nursery of a future empire. These echoes are faint, but they're there if you're listening closely enough. If you picture the map of Oo, not as it is now, but as it was over 1,000 years ago, the web of connections begins to feel almost dizzying. The big recognizable shapes we know today, the Ice Kingdom's frozen sprawl, the Candy Kingdom's pastel heart, weren't fixed. They were surrounded by a shifting patchwork of realms, some barely larger than a town, others vast, but fragile. It's in this patchwork that the desert, Wildberry Mountain, and unnamed kingdoms all played their quiet parts. And here's something worth noting. In Oo, power isn't always about armies or treasure. Sometimes it's about stories. A kingdom might hold sway for decades, simply because others believe its rulers are blessed or cursed or descended from a cosmic figure. These myths travel faster than trade goods. The Mountain Kingdom's reputation for sheltering ancient magic wasn't just a rumor that influenced how nearby realms treated them, often with a mix of caution and reverence. Even if the Mountain King didn't have an army to march, his very image was a kind of weapon. The Desert Kingdom had a similar, if more shadowy, influence. Traders passing through would carry tales of vast underground vaults filled with pre-war relics. Whether or not these treasures existed almost didn't matter. The rumor alone attracted ambitious fortune-seekers, mercenaries, and scheming nobles from across Oo. Some of these visitors settled nearby, planting seeds of new communities that later grew into entirely new political powers. It's a reminder that influence can be indirect, yet long-lasting. Now think about the Wildberry Kingdom. On the surface, it might seem too small to matter in Oo's biggest historical shifts. But that's where the web of connections becomes fascinating. Their agricultural resources made them a quiet but crucial supplier to their neighbors, especially in times of famine. A single bad harvest could ripple outward, straining alliances, sparking disputes over food storage, and forcing kingdoms into trade deals they might have otherwise avoided. In one documented famine, the Wildberry Kingdom's decision to prioritize feeding a certain ally over another is believed to have tipped the scales in a conflict far beyond their borders. Even those barely mentioned kingdoms, the blink and you'll miss them realms tucked into the show's backgrounds, probably left fingerprints on Ooze history. A bridge they built might still connect two important regions. A magical artifact they crafted might have ended up in the hands of a hero or villain centuries later. Some of these realms might have acted as cultural crossroads, blending traditions, languages, and art from different parts of Ooh into something new. And even after they were gone, their cultural fingerprints lived on in the bigger powers that absorbed them. One of the strangest patterns you see in Ooh's grand web is how disappearance often leads to rebirth, just not in the same form. A fallen kingdom might vanish politically, but its people, customs, and myths seep into the land around it. Over time, these remnants can resurface in surprising ways. The name of a long-lost realm might survive only as a landmark, a forest, a river, or a mountain pass. A royal insignia might end up carved into the door of a tavern, passed off as decoration by people who have no idea what it once meant. And sometimes the connections between these forgotten places and Ooh's great events aren't obvious until much later. You might have a modern political crisis whose roots lie in a centuries-old trade rivalry between two kingdoms that no longer exist, or a magical imbalance that can be traced back to a single relic being moved from a desert vault to a mountain shrine hundreds of years ago. It's these hidden threads, the ones almost no one notices, that make Ooh's history feel less like a timeline and more like a living, breathing organism. As you follow the strands of this web, it's tempting to imagine an invisible network beneath Ooh, one that stretches across space and time. Not tunnels or roads, but a chain of influence, heritage, and shared history. Every ruler's choice and every trader's bargain, every artist's song contributes to it. And whether we're talking about a mighty empire or a forgotten berry grove tucked into the woods, each one has its place in the weave. When we look at Ooh's present-day kingdoms, it's easy to assume the great powers rose purely on their own merits, that the Candy Kingdom's longevity is owed to Bubblegum's genius alone, or that the Ice Kingdom's dominion over the North is just a byproduct of the Ice King's magical might. But the truth is far more tangled. These realms stand on the bones of those that came before, inheriting infrastructure, territory, and even subtle traditions without realizing it. Take the Candy Kingdom, for example. There's a curious theory among historians of Ooh that its southern trade routes were first established not by candy folk at all, but by a berry-based civilization, possibly a distant cousin of the Wildberry Kingdom. These routes were so effective and well-worn that when the Candy Kingdom began expanding, they simply adopted them, perhaps without ever knowing their true origin. Even now, the gentle curve of certain roads seems to follow old berry grove lines, where sunlight and soil were once optimized for agriculture. The Mountain Kingdom's influence lingers in ways that have nothing to do with visible ruins. Old magical wards, still faintly active, dot the high ridges of Ooh's central ranges. Adventurers often stumble upon these wards without recognizing them for what they are. Their purpose might have been defensive, or perhaps ceremonial, but their placement suggests they marked sacred boundaries that later shaped the political lines between territories. These lines persist to this day not because anyone enforces them consciously, but because history imprints itself on habit. And then there's the Desert Kingdom's subtle, almost ghostly fingerprint. Many scholars believe that some of the most unusual artifacts in the possession of present-day powers, strange clocks that run backwards, music boxes that can summon weather, bottles that contain perfectly preserved moments in time, originated in its underground vaults. Over centuries, these relics passed from kingdom to kingdom, often as war loot or diplomatic gifts, until their original home was forgotten. By the time they appear in the modern era, they're divorced from their true story, yet still shaping the events around them. Even the tiniest, most fleeting realms, the unnamed fishing village that briefly styled itself a kingdom, or the mountain pass settlement that crowned a local hero as king for a single generation, can end up contributing threads to this great tapestry. Their influence might be in language, with certain phrases surviving long after the speaker's culture is gone. Or it might be in architecture, with a certain roof style echoing through generations until it becomes traditional in a place that never invented it. In this way, forgotten realms become invisible patrons of Ooze identity. When you trace these connections, a strange thing happens. The history stops feeling like a list of rise and fall stories and starts feeling like a conversation across time. The kingdoms talk to each other in indirect ways. A marriage alliance here, a stolen artifact there, a war that begins because someone refuses to honor an ancient pact. You begin to see how the fates of wildly different places like the lush wildberry groves and the harsh desert expanse could be intertwined by something as simple as a trade dispute, or the movement of a wandering bard carrying songs between courts. And let's not forget the Mushroom War, the great pivot point in Ooze history. The web of forgotten kingdoms doesn't just predate it. Many of those realms were active participants in the chaos that came before and during that cataclysm. Some were destroyed outright by the war's devastation. Others survived the initial destruction but were weakened enough that newer powers absorbed them in the chaotic rebuilding years that followed. What's remarkable is how even in destruction, their influence endured. A royal archive saved from one burning castle might become the foundation for another kingdom's legal system. A single surviving artisan could transplant their craft to a new capital, changing the look and feel of that culture for centuries. The deeper you go, the more it feels like Ooze history is one giant act of recycling, not in the mundane sense of reusing materials, but in the way that ideas, myths, and even grudges get repurposed endlessly. The fall of one kingdom doesn't erase it from the map of influence. It simply shifts its position in the network. And because that network is invisible, it's easy to overlook how much of the present is borrowed from the past. Perhaps the most beautiful part of this web is that it resists being mapped perfectly. There will always be gaps, mysteries, and contradictions. Two kingdoms might both claim ownership of the same relic's origin, and both could be right in different ways. A road might predate every kingdom that uses it, yet still be claimed as a symbol of sovereignty. In the end, the web of connections is as much about shared memory and shared forgetting as it is about tangible artifacts or boundaries. If we try to see the web as a living thing, it behaves almost like the root system of an ancient tree. Some roots are thick and obvious, anchoring great kingdoms like candy, fire, and ice. Others are fine and hair-like, carrying barely noticeable threads from lost realms like the desert kingdom or that fleeting mountain court. The thing is, you can't just look at the visible tree, the towers, walls, and banners and understand its strength. You have to imagine everything hidden underground, connecting it to centuries of history. One of the most haunting examples of this connection came from a recent discovery in the Ice Kingdom. A group of treasure hunters exploring a glacier cavern found an old banner frozen in perfect condition. At first, they thought it belonged to some forgotten Ice King reign, but closer study revealed its colors matched neither ice nor any known ally. Instead, its design bore strange geometric patterns traced back to an extinct coastal realm wiped away in the Mushroom War's tsunamis. No one could explain how it ended up hundreds of miles inland, buried in ice. Perhaps it was a trophy from a battle that history never recorded. Perhaps it was traded through hands for decades until chance carried it to the frozen north. The banner's story is gone, but its presence in that glacier changes the way historians view the connections between kingdoms. There's something oddly comforting about these threads. It means that no kingdom truly disappears without a trace. A forgotten lullaby might survive as a folk tune in another land. A lost architectural style might reappear in the background of a rebuilt city. Even the Mushroom War, which seemed like it wiped the slate clean, couldn't sever every connection. Instead, the disaster twisted the web, knotting some strands tighter and snapping others, but never erasing the entire pattern. And perhaps that's the real lesson of Oo's Forgotten Kingdoms. The past doesn't vanish, it changes form. The web might hide under layers of new culture, new rulers, and new maps, but it's always there for those willing to dig or dream deep enough. That's why explorers, historians, and storytellers alike find themselves drawn to the margins of Oo's history, searching for that one overlooked clue that could reveal a link no one suspected. Some of these connections may be deliberate and err, preserving their ancestors' customs in secret, waiting for the right moment to revive them. Others are accidental, born from the simple fact that people carry their culture with them, even when kingdoms fall. You can imagine a refugee from the Desert Kingdom, setting up shop in a small Candy Kingdom village, bringing with them not only goods and skills, but also a way of thinking, a way of seeing the world that subtly shapes that village for generations. The web also complicates the idea of original culture in Oo. If every kingdom has borrowed, inherited, or absorbed parts of others, then the notion of a pure, untouched realm becomes almost impossible. Instead, Oo's history looks more like a quilt patches, from different times and places stitched together, sometimes neatly, sometimes messily, but always forming something whole. And that quilt is still growing. Even as you listen to this, new connections are being woven. A wandering adventurer might bring a relic from one land to another. A festival might adopt a custom whose origin no one remembers. A story told to comfort a child might contain echoes of a myth from a kingdom that fell centuries ago. The web never stops stretching, never stops changing, and in that constant motion lies the beating heart of Oo's grand history. When you zoom out far enough, every great event, the rise of a ruler, the fall of a fortress, the discovery of a magical artifact, is just another knot in this vast network. And when you zoom in close enough, you see that even the smallest, quietest places contribute something. The web doesn't value size or fame. It values presence. If a realm existed, even briefly, it's in there somewhere. So as we close tonight's journey, remember, the kingdoms you know are only the surface. Beneath them lies an invisible architecture of memory, influence, and legacy that binds Oo together across the centuries. It's a history written not just in books or ruins, but in the way people trade, speak, build, and dream. And maybe the next time you see a minor background location in a story, a nameless village, a faded emblem, a forgotten path, you'll wonder if you're catching the faint glimmer of a thread in that vast and tangled web, one that still holds the weight of an entire lost kingdom's history. Good night, sleepyheads. May your dreams wander the roads between kingdoms, and may you always find the hidden connections waiting to be discovered.